Let's consider what the opposite of Psalm 25 might look like. Because, folks, I believe that such an anti-psalm probably resonates closer to what we see in today's North American culture. So, rather than put his trust in God, the anti-psalmist might open not with the line, "To you, O God, I lift my soul," but rather with this: "I'm on my own in this mess. I have to somehow dig myself out of this trouble. Since I can't count on anyone else for help, there's no point on counting on God either. Besides, God doesn't care anyhow." Is this perhaps closer to what you might think during times of difficulty? Do you, in fact, place your trust in God? Or do you tend to rely on your own resources to solve life's problems? Do you tend to face your foes alone and oftentimes succumb to their power? Or do you put your trust in love? In other words, do you put your trust in the God who is love? Well, in the story I'm about to tell, I can assure you that Tommy didn't put much faith or trust in God. 20 years ago, Tommy was a student in John Powell's faith and theology class. Powell writes, "The first time I saw Tommy, he was combing his long flaxen hair, which hung 6 inches below his shoulders." Powell goes on to write, "I know in my mind that it isn't what's on your head, but what's in it that counts. But that day, I was unprepared and my emotions flipped. I immediately filed Tommy under S for strange. Very strange." As Powell describes, Tommy turned out to be the atheist in residence in my faith and theology class. He constantly objected to, or smirked at, or whined about the possibility of an unconditionally loving God. During the 13 weeks of the course, he was for me at times a serious pain. And when Tommy came up at the end of the course to turn in his final exam, he asked in a slightly cynical tone, "Do you think I'll ever find God?" I decided instantly on a little shock therapy. "No," I said very emphatically. "Oh?" he responded. "I thought that was the product you were pushing." I let him get 5 steps from the classroom door and then called out, "Tommy, I don't think you'll ever find him, but I'm absolutely certain that he will find you." Tommy shrugged a little. He left my class, and he left my life. The whole thing sounds a bit like anti-Psalm 25, doesn't it? And yet the psalmist cries out, "Remember your mercy, O God, and your steadfast love, for they are as old as time. According to your steadfast love, remember me for your goodness' sake, O God." In other words, Psalm 25's author absolutely depends on God. We might think of her as as a baby bird, stretching her hungry mouth toward a feeding mother. Or a small child pleading for grandfather's help. The psalmist, after all, recognizes that only God can give her the help she so desperately needs. And as Christians, we're familiar with pleas for such provision. Right? We offer them for things like our daily bread. We just did that a few minutes ago. Our health and strength, safe travels. We plead for protection. We beg God to bless not only ourselves, but our families, our friends, and our neighbors, our co-workers, our leaders, various needy people, so on and so on, even our enemies. We plead with God to bless our nations and bless the world. All because we recognize that we depend on God for every good thing. But in our story, not Tommy. Tommy shows no great kinship with God. At least not yet. Professor Powell tells his readers that after handing in his final exam, Tommy left his class and left his life. Later, Powell writes, I heard that Tommy had graduated, and I was truly grateful. Then a sad report. I heard that Tommy had terminal cancer. Before I could search him out, he came to me. When he walked into my office, his body was badly wasted, and the long hair had all fallen out as a result of the chemotherapy. But his eyes were bright, and his voice was firm, probably for the first time, I believe. Tommy, I heard you were sick, I blurted out. Yes, I have lung cancer, both lungs. It's a matter of weeks. What's it like to be only 24 years old and dying? I couldn't help but ask. Well, it could be worse, Tommy answered. Could be like being 50 or 60 and having no values or ideals. Like being 50 or 60 and thinking that booze, seducing women, and making money are the real biggies in life. But what I really came to see you about, Tom said, is something you said to me on the last day of class. I asked you if you thought I would ever find God. And you said no, which surprised me. Then you said, but He will find you. Well, I thought about that a lot, especially when the doctors removed a lump from my groin and told me it was malignant. And when the malignancy spread to my vital organs, I really began banging bloody fists against the bronze doors of heaven. Tommy sat silent for a moment, then continued. But God didn't come out. In fact, nothing happened. Did you ever try anything for a long time with great effort but no success? You get psychologically gutted, fed up with trying. And then you quit. Well, one day I woke up, and instead of throwing a few more futile appeals over that high brick wall to a God who may or may not be there. I just quit. I decided that I really didn't care about God, about an afterlife, or anything like that. To you, O God, I lift my soul, the psalmist writes. My God, in you I trust. But not Tommy. The thought that remained stuck in his mind was, I'm on my own in this mess. I can't count on anyone else for help. So there's no point in counting on God either. Besides, God doesn't care anyhow. So rather than reach out to God one more time, Tommy decided to spend what little time he had left doing something more profitable. I thought about you in your class, Tommy told Professor Powell, and remembered something else you had said. The essential sadness is to go through life without loving. But it would be almost equally sad to go through life and leave this world without ever telling those you loved that you love them. So, I began with the hardest one, my dad. He was reading the newspaper when I approached him. Dad. Yes? Tom's dad asked without lowering the newspaper. Dad, I'd like to talk to you. We'll talk. I mean, it's really important. The newspaper came down slowly, 3 inches. What is it? He asked. Dad, I love you. I just wanted to let you know. Tom smiled at me, Professor Powell remembers, and said with obvious satisfaction, as though he felt a warm and secret joy starting to flow within him, the newspaper fluttered to the floor. Then my father did 2 things I can never remember him ever doing before. He cried and he hugged me. And we talked all night, even though we had to work the next morning. It felt so good to be close to my father, to see his tears, to feel his hug, to hear him say that he loved me. And the process continued with my mother and my little brother. Tommy paused for a moment, caught up as he was in his remembrances, before continuing. Then one day I turned around and God was there. God hadn't come to me when I pleaded with him. I know now that God is not at our beck and call. But the important thing is that God was there. Maybe all along. Only I hadn't found God, but God did find me. God found me even after I stopped looking for him. Tom, I practically gasped. I think you're saying something very important and much more universal than you realize. To me, at least, you're saying that the surest way to find God is not to make God a private possession, a problem solver, or an instant consolation in times of need, but rather you find God by opening yourself to love. The author of John's Gospel said much the same thing. He said that God is love. And anyone who lives in love is living with God. And God is living within them. We find God, who is love, when we relate to others in love. Tom died a week later. Of course, his life was not really ended by his death, only changed. He had made the greatest step from faith into vision. But not before he'd said in his heart, "To you, O God, I lift my soul. My God, in you I can now trust."